So imagine you're me for a second. You and your friend are like 4,000 trophies, and neither of you really know how to play the game, but you have a lot of fun playing Clash together, so you want to get good at 2v2. So you go online, and nobody plays this mode. Like, nobody. I'm telling you. I was in that situation 3 years ago, and even today there are zero good resources on how to play this mode. Like what strategies are good, or even what cards are good. Like, there's nothing. Nobody talks about it. Nobody's making videos. The closest thing is some Deck Shop Pro article where they list a bunch of 2v2 decks, which low-key are all kind of mid. Now in the last 3 years, I have gotten significantly better at the game, and I understand how it works now. But what I really got good at over the past 3 years is 2v2. So here's what I've learned. 2v2 is the single most f***ed game mode this game offers, even more so than the silo event.
Not a nice person and like not tornado or do a spell on this. Sometimes for me when I was practicing,
and it's deceptive in this way, as most would view it as nearly adjacent to 1v1s in terms of strategy and key skills due to there being no outlying gimmicks, but trust me, things are very different. Alright, let me go over the basics real quick. So first, Elixir generates a lot slower in this mode than it does in 1v1s. Between the two of you, as in you and your teammate, more Elixir is being generated overall, but you only get access to your half of it. I think the speed is like 0.6 or 0.7 of what it usually is for you. I'll put it up on screen. Secondly, King Tower has 2 cannons. Activating the king was already really powerful in 1v1s, but it's downright insane-o broken in 2v2. And third, your opponent have 8 cards each, for 16 cards overall. This pretty much means using cards like Spark Your Graveyard, which have 100-0 hard counter cards, like Rocket and like Mother Witch. It's a lot riskier running those cards, because there's double the chance your opponent has it, basically. Now, the first part of being good at Clash Royale 2v2 is, unfortunately, being good at Clash Royale 1v1s. Mind you, there are key differences that set the two modes apart, of course, but they're easiest understood once you have a good grasp of how 1v1s work. So if you've already made it to Ultimate Champion and are good enough that you can get 12 wins in a Classic Challenge, I would advise you to skip to timestamp. But for the rest of you, here's what you should know going into this video so we all start on the same page. I'll try to go through this quick. Clash Royale 1v1 is a game of Elixir. The player who ultimately gets more Elixir wins. But how do we get Elixir? You mean with the Elixir pump? I mean, that's one way of doing it. But take a look at this example. A Hog Rider is riding towards your tower, and in your hand you got a Fireball, a Giant, a Wizard, and a Cannon. How do we turn this situation into getting an Elixir? Well, first, let's forget the Giant, since Giant can't really help much against a Hog Rider. And while we're at it, we can drop the Fireball idea too. The Hog will still get damage off of us, and we end up spending the same amount of Elixir, with the only difference being our tower is now down a Hog hit. So that's no good. This leaves us with the Wizard and Cannon. And with these two options, we can display the 2 primary ways to get Elixir. Let's explore the Cannon first. A Cannon will fully defend the Hog Rider for only 3 Elixir. Cannoneer or not, the Princess can do this too. And since the Hog Rider cost the opponent 4 Elixir, and the Cannon cost us 3, we have now gained 1 Elixir off our opponent. Awesome. A 1 Elixir advantage isn't exactly anything to write home about, but a few more of these and our opponent won't be able to fight back. But what about that other option, the Wizard? Not only is the Wizard 5 Elixir, but it also can't fully counter the Hog Rider. What makes this any better than the Fireball, let alone the Cannon? At least the Fireball only costs 4 Elixir. Well, the Wizard does something that neither the Fireball or the Cannon can do, and that's counter push. See, the Wizard's got these little legs that it can use to walk across the river. Those are valuable. Think about it this way. The Wizard who defended the Hog Rider is still fully healthy. That's 5 Elixir of Wizard that you still control and can make use of. Both the Cannon and Fireball disappear once you use them, but that's not the case with the Wizard. In a way, the 5 Elixir you spent on the Wizard is still technically in your possession, even if it's not in your bar. Taking this into account, the Wizard killing the Hog Rider nets you a healthy +4 Elixir gained, since the Wizard is still there, which in a lot of situations is worth the tower damage sacrifice to make it happen, especially since we have a Giant in hand that can instantly support the Wizard. We're going to categorize these 2 methods of obtaining Elixir as trading positively and counter pushing. Of course, there's a lot of nuance with both methods, as well as a third secret evil option. Remember that Giant from earlier? Well, if we decide to completely ignore the Hog Rider and place our Giant in the back, we technically, by definition, get a +4 Elixir trade thanks to the free, costless damage of our Cannoneer. But we also pretty much lose our entire tower. This allows us to push with our Giant while being +4 though, so it's still an option. In Clash Royale, you should always always aim to push while you're up in elixir. Pushing while the opponent has more elixir than you do will almost never result in any real damage. But how much elixir do you need to be up before you push? Well, that depends where your deck lies on this handy dandy slider. Every possible deck combination in this whole game lies somewhere on this slider. An easy rule of thumb is that the more expensive your deck is, the more it associates with beatdown, and vice versa for cheap decks associating with control. But even if you're familiar with the terms beatdown and control, what does it actually mean? Well, remember the two methods of gaining elixir? Yep, they directly correlate to these two new terms I just introduced. I hope you've been paying attention. Control decks focus on positively trading and almost always include a building. Their pushes are always very low cost. Maybe a miner and some wall breakers would be the most elixir they would spend on a single push. Since the pushes are so low risk and low impact, you only need to be up maybe 2 or 3 elixir on your opponent before going in. These decks are very defense heavy because that's how they gain all their elixir. The low cost pushes also guarantees that even if the opponent fully defends and counter pushes, you still have more than enough elixir left over to defend since you barely spent any of it on offense to begin with, and thus now you can gain more elixir by defending and the cycle continues. Beatdown decks are on the other side of the spectrum, where most of their elixir gained is from counter pushing, and usually don't include a building since, buildings can't counter push. They lack the wizard's legs. Beatdown decks rely on big expensive pushes to barge their way right through any defense the opponent tries to put up. This strategy requires a pretty hefty elixir advantage though, usually needing to have gained at least a +4 elixir advantage before you start a push, though it does depend on the deck. These decks are very offense heavy because that's how they gain their elixir. Remember the wizard from earlier? That +4 elixir we got off him would all go to waste if we just let him cross the bridge unsupported. Though defense was where the push started, it's through offense that the defense gains its value. While these two gameplay loops are very similar, they have one key difference, which is the damage output. Beatdown decks aim to take a little damage from the opponent to gain enough elixir to deal even more damage back at them, while control decks don't plan on their towers taking any damage at all, with the caveat that they also plan on dealing their damage a lot slower, giving the opponent more chances to get damage on you. Everything is contextual, and this game really rewards an understanding of both these concepts. I'm sure you're a little curious about what the decks in the middle of the spectrum are like and how they play. I won't go into too much depth since the range of decks in this grey area is also varied, but in general, they usually all play like control, but with a big expensive card thrown in there to try and mimic the damage output of beatdown. These decks like Royal Giant or Electro Giant are all a jack of all trades, master of none type situation that apply both elixir gaining methods fairly evenly and can adapt which one they lean into more depending on their matchup. Now, I know I said at the start that whichever player gains more elixir wins, and I'm not taking back that statement. That being said, there's one more really important concept to understand how 1v1 Clash Royale works, and that's the opponent's card cycle, aka knowing what cards are in your opponent's hand at any given moment, or more importantly, what cards they don't have in their hand at any given moment. Now, the concept of bait isn't very complicated. You fill your deck with strong cards that all have the same one weakness, usually a small spell or a fireball in some cases. So then you put your opponent in a situation where they need to use their card that you're weak to. So then the rest of your cards that are weak to it are free of their weakness for like 30 seconds until your opponent plays 4 more cards and gets it back in their hand. This can get complicated if the opponent has 2 copies of your weakness in their deck. Baiting out 2 different cards before they cycle back to the first one is very difficult task, and why mid-ladder is a place of hell. It's not just bait decks either. Every win condition has a card that they just absolutely hate to see on the opponent's side of the field. Baiting that counter out first before pushing with your win condition is a great idea for any deck if they want to effectively convert gained elixir into tower damage. I'm not going to go too deep into this topic for reasons you'll see later, but basically knowing the opponent's card cycle is almost just as important as gaining elixir is when deciding the outcome of a match. Hello to everyone who skipped this timestamp from earlier. It is now time to talk about 2v2 and how awesomely unique it is in terms of strategy. Now I'm going to start going through the strategic differences and adaptations that 2v2 brings to the table. This next section will be split into 3 parts. First, understanding split elixir. As we all know, in 2v2, both you and your partner have your own elixir bars that both cap out at 10. This turns both deck building as well as splash card power level on its head. Picture this: an alternate reality where instead of 2 individual bars of 10 elixir, you and your teammate share a massive collective bar of 20 elixir that you can both dip into at any time. At first, it might not seem all that different to what we have in our reality, but in practice, here's what would happen. Player A would bring his big golem beatdown deck that excels on offense, while player B would bring his hyper defensive minor poison control deck to the game. Both sides wait until 20 elixir builds up and the beatdown player starts to build a push. The control player can then just sit there and do nothing until it's time to defend. After all, why would he he help out with the golem push? His deck is clearly not designed to support a golem. Their combined elixir would be best spent on offense if the push comprised exclusively of person A's cards, as they are a much better fit to support the golem. After all, he's playing a golem deck. If the opponents decide to fight back with their own push, that's where person B comes in. They use whatever elixir is left in the reserve, hopefully Mr. Beatdown wasn't being too greedy, to defend the incoming push, as his minor deck is designed with absolute defense in mind. While this is happening, Mr. Beatdown can relax. Why would he help out with the defending? His deck is clearly not designed with defense in mind. Their combined elixir would be best spent on defense if the defense comprised exclusively of person B's minor card, as they are much better designed to stop the push. He is running a control deck after all. You see what's going on here? If both players shared the same 20 elixir, you could have one beatdown and the other play control, and swap between the two strategies when their strong points are needed. I feel this was a really important scenario to bring up because it really highlights how something like that just couldn't work in our current split elixir system. If player A just tried to play strictly offensive, he would get slowed down by the slower elixir regeneration of 2v2. And if player B waited until the opponent pushed before playing his cards, he'd either leak a bunch of elixir or simply succumb to the slower elixir generation too while trying to make a big defense. This was basically a really long-winded, convoluted way to say, you need to work with your teammate. I know, crazy concept. Minutes into the video and I'm only now telling you that teamwork is important. Yes, teamwork is important. Having one of you play control and one of you play beatdown is just simply ineffective. It can work, I'm not going to deny it outright, but this mode is so much easier if you both play similar decks. Whenever they had 2v2 featured in CRL, you know what the pros would do? They would just play near identical decks with maybe the spells swapped out or something. If you're going to push, both of you are going to push. And if you're going to defend, well, that's kind of more complicated. Look at both of your hands and have good judgment is all I'd say about that. Either way, to get anywhere in this mode, you need to use both elixir bars towards a single goal. That game from the alternate reality can be achieved with one simple trick. Watch this. Yeah, you just swap win conditions with your partner. Doing this makes it so much easier to coordinate meaningful pushes with your partner. In this example, if the miner and the golem swapped decks, then the miner player can spend on the golem itself, while the golem player, who now no longer has golem in his deck, can spend on supporting it. Effectively, they combined their elixir pools and made an actual threatening push with their 20 elixir. The same can be said about the flip side. By splitting the win conditions, you can spend more elixir on each strategy instead of spending half of it on one and half of it on the other. If you both just try to do your own thing, you will lose. Wait, even if I did somehow understand that bullshit, what about that whole this turns both deck building as well as splash card power level on its head thing? Well, I'll ask you this. What cards are good in the chaotic, unbalanced 7x elixir mode? That's right, splash units. More elixir means more cards funneled through the bridge, which means more value for splash units on defense. Now, this mode doesn't generate anything close to 7x elixir. Another side effect of having your elixir bar split in two is that cards are forced to be played a lot more often. Nobody wants to leak elixir, so when you reach 10, you're going to play something from your hand. This is Clash 101. In 2v2 though, your opponent is effectively reaching the 10 elixir mark twice as often and forced to play something, which can lead to further clumping of units, especially if both opponents reach 10 at around the same time. Splash units and spells are the easiest way to turn clumping into positive trades, not to mention the chance that your opponents just... Yeah, a splash unit would get a lot of value here. And they have a bomb tower. Part 2. Macro found dead in a ditch. This part's kind of boring, so I'll be quick and get to the point with this one. Macro in Clash Royale is the blanket term for keeping track of both your opponent's current elixir, as well as what cards they have in their hand. Keeping track of these things perfectly is nearly impossible, and only the best players can do it. But even an okay player like me can macro to a certain degree. Like if I see the opponent use their firecracker, I know that their hand no longer has firecracker in it. Or if I watch the opponent drop a P.E.K.K.A in the back, I now know that they have a maximum of 3 elixir in their bar now. This info is neither obtainable nor useful in 2v2. If the opponent plays a firecracker, it doesn't mean jack shit, because what if the second opponent also has a firecracker? I can't tell you how many times I've strategized around baiting out something like a bomb tower before going in, and finding out they had 2 bomb towers this whole time because card cycle information doesn't mean shit in this mode. It gets worse when you see the opponents play cycle cards like Ice Spirit and Skeletons. You know that one of the opponents is getting back to their cards faster, but which one? I really wish 2v2 had slightly different colored health bars for each opponent, so you know who's playing what cards. I understand it would add to the screen clutter and confuse a lot of people though, so maybe have it as like a toggle in the settings, or in-game like the toggle to see your teammate's hand. Oh yeah, this is you can press the little clan symbol to hide their hand. I can't remember if the game ever mentions this anywhere, but yeah. Until something gets added like that though, macro is found dead in the ditch. Not to say there's not any macro you can do. To say that would be to say there's not really any skill involved in the game at all. Because there is skill, it's just located elsewhere. Alright, look at this graph I just made. This is a graph which roughly outlines what aspects are most important in top ladder matches. Macro, it's important. Micro, it's important. Matchup, very important. When you get to top ladder, having a good matchup on your opponent means more than anything. They can play a lot better than you in macro and micro, but if you have matchup, chances are you're winning that game. Now in mid ladder, which is anything from 5,000 trophies to below top 10,000 in the world, macro 10%, micro, it's also like not that important. Matchup, it's pretty important, but card level is very important in mid ladder. Without the card level though, it's just a lot of matchup, pretty much the same as before. Now in 2v2, the graph looks something more like this. About 2% macro, 25% micro, 25% matchup, and 48% teamwork. While macro don't mean shit, micro definitely does. Oh yeah, micro is just stuff like which tile you place your building, timing your tornadoes correctly, reacting to dart goblins quick enough, etc. It's just all the tiny little adjustments you make throughout the course of the game which add up. Oh yeah, this is the part where I circle back to that discussion on the 2 elixir gaining methods earlier, at the timestamp people skipped. I've been a little harsh on macro lately, but in fairness to them, you can still get positive trades as well as counter push in this mode, which almost count. If you kill a hog rider with a cannon in 2v2, you're still +1. Nothing has changed in that regard. Same with counter pushing. But what makes it a little more nuanced in 2v2 is that you also need to be aware of what method your partner is going for too. Say your partner plays a wizard to stop a hog rider, but has no elixir left to slap something in front of it. It's your job to understand that without some sort of win condition in front of that wizard, it loses a lot of that latent value we discussed earlier. Same goes for if your partner is playing a control strategy and just wants to poke them a bit to prod them into pushing so we can get value on defense. Let them. Don't take it as an invitation to go all in and overcommit to a push that was never intended to deal any real damage in the first place. Our plan is to pool our elixir into a single goal, remember? But it's still so important you understand these concepts for the sake of applying them to your partner as well as yourself, which, by the way, is what that big teamwork chunk of the pie chart was on about earlier. When you're less experienced at the game, it can be hard to understand your own deck's game plan, let alone your partner's game plan, or even how they interact with each other as well on top of it all. So communication is very important here. Probably my favorite thing about 2v2 is that all of the focus is on what you are doing and how you impact the field, rather than reacting and adapting to your opponent's macro, which you can't even see. It's kind of nice being able to play a game mode where I don't need to worry about my opponent's card cycle or elixir count, and can still play at a high level, since I don't think even Mo Light would be able to keep track of all that stuff in 2v2. Finally, we made it to the most important section of the video. Congratulations. Here I'll be making a tier list of all the cards in the game and dividing them into 5 categories, depending on how good they are in 2v2 compared to 1v1. We got the S tier for the unbalanced cards, A tier for very good cards, B if the card on its own is nothing special in 2v2, but if both you and your partner have it, it gains special properties and strengths. Then we have cards that get worse in 2v2, and then cards that get really bad in 2v2. Alright, here we're going to start with the top, because knowing what's at the top contextualizes this whole list. In the S tier we have Tornado, Fisherman, Royal Delivery, Goblinstein, Princess. Up to this point in the video, I've neglected to talk about any semblance of actual specific strategies in 2v2, as I wanted to first paint a picture in your head about the foundation of the mode. The full picture is about to kick in. This format is dominated by one card, and that card is Tornado. Actually, stick him up there. It deserves its own tier. Across years of playing this mode, not once did I ever look at a deck and go, maybe the Tornado is the problem. It's like this card was custom made for this format. This card does so many things. So most importantly, it A, bunches up hordes of units, and B, activates the King Tower, which if you remember correctly has 2 cannons in this mode. I've mentioned before that splash units and big spells are good in this mode because people miscommunicate and bunch up their troops. This spell takes that strength and multiplies it tenfold. Suddenly cards that dominate the format now dominate it harder. It's gotten to the point where more often than not, when building a deck for 2v2, instead of starting from a win condition and working my way up like any normal person would, I start at the Tornado and work my way out from there. If there is one thing I want you to take away from this video, it's to use the Tornado. Actually, the S tier looks kind of
wrong without 5 cards in it, so we'll just, yeah. I'll just move Giant Skeleton up there for now. I'll try to go through the rest of the S tier briefly. Fisherman holds the title of best card for abusing the fact the king has 2 cannons now. Pretty self-explanatory why he's up here. Also combos amazingly with himself as an added bonus. Play Fisherman. Royal Delivery holds the title of best card at mass killing troops being funneled through the bridge. Also combines amazingly with itself. Play Delivery. Goblinstein is the second best card at mass killing troops being funneled through the bridge, and acts as a win condition most games when paired with Tornado. Giant Skeleton is tanky, reliable, hard to break through, and his bomb is, say it with me, good at killing troops being funneled through the bridge. Princess is probably the best 2v2 win condition. That's right, win condition, partially because it can deal semi-reliable damage to the princess towers, partially because it can chip away at troops funneled through the bridge, partially because it's the only real defense card with enough range to never be bunched up with your teammates' troops, partially because placing her at the bridge forces the opponents to go through a neuron activation moment 99% of the time, but mainly because when people try to take her out, it starts a bridge battle, essentially turning every other card in this tier online and active, and poised to get value. The gameplay in the background of this segment is me and my clanmate Poggerfrogger each playing these 6 cards and then whatever 2 evolutions we feel like. We weren't playing over a voice call in this footage or anything, and even though Pogger is a troubled individual who can't NATO a hog to the king tower for his life, we were able to win a majority of games despite not carrying a real win condition on either of us. Also kinda off topic, but can Royale API please take Sparky down from their list of win conditions? Jeez. Next up is the A tier. These are cards that get marginally better in 2v2 than 1v1. I won't be going through these cards individually because there's a lot of them, but for the most part we got big spells, splash units, every building except for Elixir Pump, some win conditions that have a niche, small spells, these guys, and Inferno Dragon. This is probably a good place to bring up that for the evos on this list, I'm taking opportunity cost into account. See the way I chose to put the unevolved Goblin Cage on here? That's because I think that yes, Goblin Cage is better in this mode, but you're better off using your 2 slots on other better evolutions. What do I know though? I hear they're running it in Lava Hound these days. Oh yeah, and real quick, this A+ tier here is reserved for A tier cards that synergize well with the S tier cards. B tier is for cards which on their own are not marginally better in 2v2 than 1v1, but when both players are running it, it becomes dangerous. This tier was hard to make because I can guarantee you once 2v2 ladder hits, every pro under the sun is just going to be running double log bait. I have this feeling in my sternum. I just know it's going to happen because that's how pros think. But without both people fully committing to the log bait theme, these cards are horrendous in 2v2. E tier is for cards which just one way or the other don't appreciate the medium of 2v2, and I would advise you avoid them. It's probably tough for a lot of you to see Hog Rider down there, but if you would quickly glance at what card is in the SS tier, I'm sure you can understand why. F tier is for Minion Horde. I love Minion Horde. It's probably in my top 5 cards of all time, but it's somehow worse here than in 1v1, where it was already a bottom 10 card to begin with. Don't ask me how they accomplished that. Anyway, screenshot that if you want the tier list. Let's get to the deck list. Woo! Pro players, what do they know? Goblin Barrel? A bait deck? In 2v2? Come on now. How is that even fun? You know, despite Supercell once considering 2v2 a competitive format, you'd have your work cut out for you finding any helpful resources regarding it. Closest thing we got are these 3 Kings Council videos from 2019 on their esports channel. They show pros going through their match-winning games in detail. If only it were me up on that stage, I could show the world. I could show it what 2v2 really is. That it isn't just 1v1s, but doubled. I mean, look at these guys using 1v1 decks. Aw, what's next? You gonna try keep track of their cycle and elixir count? That's so cute. Sorry, champ. Not in this mode.
Yeah, you also see that Baron is at exactly 4 elixir, and he's going to have to fireball the magic archer, or else the magic archer will get hundreds and hundreds of damage, and that will leave him with 0 elixir and not able to help Chris to defend.
Does he fireball?
I'm pretty sure he fireballed.
Yeah, what a play by Thunderstruck.
He knew that one of the opponents was on exactly 4, that the opponent on 4 had fireball in hand, and that the opponent with 6 elixir had no better options in his hand to answer the magic archer, thus forcing the opponent to go down to 0, while they already had the foresight to charge a ram rider down left lane to capitalize on the fireball bait play they were about to make. 3 years, man. 3 years of this goddamn mode. For what? They were doing this shit 5 years ago? That information should have been impossible to obtain. How did he do it? It's times like this where it feels hopeless. That despite your best efforts, those with more talent walk among you every day. No matter how much effort, no matter how much time, you'll never be at the top. You'll never even be close, no matter how much you want it. That's okay. There's merit to being average. As long as you care, that's all the more reason to keep going forward. Daedalus, it's a mobile game! Okay, fine, whatever. If you're looking for a deck list to copy-paste right out the gate, I'd recommend those 6 god cards we discussed from earlier. I don't think I've made it very apparent before, but for those 2 Evo slots, you can use literally any combination of Evos in the whole game and the deck will fully function. You heard that right. Whatever evolutions you own fit right into those slots. The Evo Firecracker, Valkyrie, Mortar, as well as just the cheaper Evos in general, are probably ideal, but I haven't tested an Evo combination so far that hasn't worked, so have fun with it. I can't stress enough how incredibly powerful the big 6 are. The deck core is powerful because it utilizes the strength of both Tornado and Double King Tower, and the lack of any primary win condition means you don't need to gamble on your opponent's card cycle, and can focus purely on getting big value out of your elixir, while chipping them with the princess. The flexibility is insane too. If the lack of a win condition is bumming you out, then play one of them in your evolution slot. Mortar fits right in with the siege theme we got going on, and cards like RG and Drill have synergy with cards like the Giant Skeleton and the Goblins. Feel free to dip into the A+ tier as well if you feel your specific combination of evolutions needs something like an Xe or a Magic Archer to really get the engine going. I encourage experimentation. Or if experimenting isn't quite your thing and you don't like the look of the big 6, I'll flash a couple deck lists up on screen which I've personally had success with. And I think I can call it there. Thank you so much for watching this far into the video. I really did put a lot of effort into this. I've never edited a big ass video like this before, let alone doing it all in 1 week so the video releases before ranked 2v2 drops. Edit. It has dropped an hour ago. Please be sure to like and subscribe to help me get into the Supercell Creator Program. I think I need to reach 5k subs to make that happen. And while you're at it, I've got some other bangers to check out like this one as well. Thanks.